My daughter-in-law put me in the last row shouting, "The poor sit at the back." During the speech, my granddaughter thanked the grandmother who paid my $800,000 for Harvard. My daughter-in-law's face was priceless. Listen to my story until the end and comment from which city you are watching me. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Margaret Eleanor Whitmore, and I am 73 years old. Everything started when I received that ivory-colored invitation in the mail, embossed with gold lettering that read, "Harvard Medical School Commencement Ceremony." My heart swelled with pride as I traced my finger over my granddaughter Emma's name, printed beneath the formal announcement. After 8 long years of sacrifice, secrecy, and silent support, this moment had finally arrived. I had been keeping the most important secret of my life, one that had cost me nearly everything I owned, yet filled me with a satisfaction deeper than any material possession ever could. For 8 years, I had been anonymously funding Emma's medical education at one of the world's most prestigious universities, while my daughter-in-law Patricia believed the money came from scholarships and student loans. The morning of the graduation ceremony dawned crisp and clear. I carefully selected my best dress, a navy blue ensemble with pearl buttons that I had worn to my late husband Harold's retirement party 15 years ago. It still fit perfectly, though I had lost considerable weight over the years, partly from stress and partly from the modest meals I had been eating to stretch every dollar toward Emma's education. Patricia had insisted on organizing the seating arrangements for the family. When I arrived at the magnificent graduation venue, she greeted me with that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes, the same expression she had worn since marrying my son Robert 22 years ago. "Oh, Margaret," she said, looking me up and down with barely concealed disdain. "How quaint. You look exactly like what I expected." She gestured toward the back rows of the auditorium. "The family seating is quite organized this year. The donors and distinguished guests sit in the front, of course. And well," she paused, her voice dripping with condescension, "the poor folk sit in the back. That's where you belong, don't you think?" I felt a familiar sting, but I had grown accustomed to Patricia's barbs over the years. She had always seen me as beneath her family's social standing. What she didn't know was that I had more invested in this ceremony than anyone else in that entire auditorium. My son Robert stood nearby, his face flushed with embarrassment, but as always, he remained silent. He had learned long ago that challenging Patricia led to weeks of cold shoulders and passive-aggressive comments that poisoned their household. I had watched him gradually transform from the confident, independent man I had raised into someone who bent to his wife's will in all matters, especially when it came to me. "That's perfectly fine, Patricia," I replied calmly, clutching my small purse tighter. "I'm just happy to be here to see Emma graduate." Patricia's sister, Victoria, who had flown in from the East Coast for the ceremony, snickered from behind her designer sunglasses. "Oh, Margaret, you're such a good sport about everything. I don't know how you manage on your little pension. It must be so difficult." I made my way to the back row, settling into a seat that was actually quite comfortable, with an excellent view of the stage. Around me sat other family members who, like me, had been deemed unworthy of the premium seating. There was Mrs. Chen, whose grandson was also graduating and who worked 3 jobs to support her extended family. Next to her sat Marcus Williams, a proud father whose daughter was receiving her medical degree after he had worked double shifts at the factory for 6 years to help with expenses. As I waited for the ceremony to begin, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. It had started 8 years ago when Emma, fresh out of college with a biology degree, had come to visit me with tears in her eyes. "Grandma Margaret," she had said, sitting at my kitchen table over tea and homemade cookies, "I got accepted to Harvard Medical School, but I don't know how I'm going to afford it. Mom and Dad say they can't help much, and the financial aid isn't enough. I might have to give up my dream." That night, after Emma had gone home, I sat at that same kitchen table with my financial documents spread before me. Harold had been a prudent man, and despite our modest lifestyle, he had left me with a substantial life insurance policy and a respectable retirement fund. We had never had children of our own until Robert came into our lives, my late sister's boy, whom we adopted after she passed away when he was 12. I made a decision that night that would change everything. I would liquidate my assets slowly, carefully, and anonymously fund Emma's education. I contacted the university's financial aid office and arranged to make payments through a trust fund I established, ensuring that Emma would never know where the money originated. The process was more complex than I had anticipated. I had to sell Harold's vintage car collection, 12 classic automobiles that he had lovingly restored over 30 years of marriage. Each sale felt like losing a piece of him, but I could hear his voice in my memory. Maggie, that girl has something special. We always said we'd do anything for family. Next went the antique furniture that had been in my family for generations, pieces that Patricia had often admired with barely concealed envy. The mahogany dining set, the hand-carved armoire, the Persian rugs that my grandmother had brought from the old country. Each item was appraised, sold, and the proceeds quietly transferred to Emma's education fund. I downsized from the 4-bedroom house where Robert had grown up to a small apartment across town. When Patricia asked about the move, I simply said I wanted something more manageable at my age. She seemed relieved to have me further away, and I was grateful for the reduced overhead that allowed me to channel more money toward Emma's tuition. The hardest sacrifice came in the 4th year when Emma's expenses increased dramatically. I had to liquidate my retirement investments, the nest egg that was supposed to secure my golden years. I took a part-time job at the local library, shelving books and helping with the children's reading program, earning just enough to cover my basic living expenses. During this time, Emma would often call to update me on her progress. She was excelling in her studies, making the dean's list repeatedly and showing exceptional promise in pediatric surgery. She frequently mentioned her mysterious scholarship that seemed to cover exactly what she needed each semester. "It's the strangest thing, Grandma," she had said during one of our weekly phone calls. "The financial aid office says I have this guardian angel donor who wants to remain anonymous. I wish I could thank them properly." Meanwhile, Patricia continued to treat me as the poor relative who was barely tolerated at family gatherings. She would make comments about my simplified wardrobe, my smaller living space, and what she perceived as my diminished circumstances. At Christmas dinners, she would seat me at the children's table, claiming the adult table was for contributing members of the family. Robert, to his eternal shame, allowed this treatment to continue. During one particularly painful Thanksgiving, when Patricia had made several comments about my obviously thrift store clothing, I saw him wince but say nothing. That night, I went home and added an extra $1,000 to Emma's account, funded by selling my engagement ring, the one Harold had saved for 6 months to buy when we were young and poor and desperately in love. The deception became increasingly elaborate as the years progressed. When Emma needed money for medical textbooks, clinical rotations, and research opportunities, I had to become creative. I sold my jewelry piece by piece, including the pearl necklace that had been my mother's and the sapphire brooch Harold had given me for our silver anniversary. I started taking on additional work, cleaning offices in the early morning hours before my library shifts, doing alterations for a local dry cleaner, even walking dogs for busy professionals in the upscale neighborhood where I used to live. Every dollar earned went into Emma's educational fund. The physical toll was significant. My arthritis worsened from the manual labor, and I developed chronic back pain from the long hours spent cleaning. But every time I received an update about Emma's academic achievements, her research publications, her clinical excellence, her acceptance into the prestigious pediatric surgery residency program, I knew every sacrifice had been worthwhile. Patricia remained blissfully unaware of my financial contributions. She attributed Emma's success entirely to the girl's intelligence and what she believed were minimal student loans. At family gatherings, she would boast about Emma's achievements as if she and Robert had been the primary supporters, conveniently forgetting that their actual financial contribution had been minimal. "We always knew Emma would be successful," Patricia would say at dinner parties. "Good genes and proper upbringing, you know. Robert and I have always prioritized education in our family." I would sit quietly, usually in a corner or at the kitchen table while the important guests occupied the formal dining room, listening to Patricia claim credit for sacrifices she couldn't even imagine. The irony was that Patricia's own lifestyle had become increasingly extravagant during Emma's medical school years. She had redecorated their house twice, taken expensive vacations to Europe and the Caribbean, and purchased a luxury car that cost more than I had spent on 2 years of Emma's tuition. She seemed to believe that Emma's education was being funded by magic. During Emma's 6th year, I faced my greatest financial crisis. The tuition had increased, and she needed additional funding for an international rotation that would significantly enhance her surgical training. I had sold everything of value except my small apartment, and my meager income was barely covering my basic needs. I made the most difficult decision of my life. I took out a reverse mortgage on my apartment. It meant I would never own anything again, but it provided the final funds Emma needed to complete her education with distinction. The loan officer, a kind woman named Sandra Rodriguez, had tried to counsel me against the decision. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is a significant step. Are you sure you want to risk your housing security? What if your circumstances change?" I had smiled at her and said simply, "Some investments are worth any risk." As Emma approached graduation, the stress of maintaining the deception while watching Patricia take credit for Emma's success became almost unbearable. I had lost 30 pounds, developed insomnia, and my doctor had expressed concern about my blood pressure. But I had also gained something precious, the knowledge that I had given the most important gift possible to someone I loved. 2 weeks before the graduation ceremony, Emma had called with exciting news. "Grandma, I've been selected to give a speech at graduation. The faculty chose me to represent our class because of my research and academic performance. I'm so nervous, but I want to thank everyone who made this possible." "That's wonderful, dear," I had said, my heart swelling with pride. "What will you talk about?" "I want to talk about the importance of support systems in medical education, about how someone believed in me enough to make my dreams possible, even when I didn't think I deserved it." Now, sitting in the back row as Patricia had mandated, I watched the processional begin. The graduates filed in wearing their caps and gowns, and I spotted Emma immediately, radiant, confident, and carrying herself with the poise of someone who belonged in those hallowed halls. The ceremony proceeded with the traditional formalities. Distinguished faculty members gave speeches about the responsibility of medical practice, the importance of compassion in healing, and the debt these new doctors owed to those who had supported their journey. Then came the moment I had been both anticipating and dreading. Emma stepped up to the podium to deliver the student address. She looked stunning in her graduation regalia, her dark hair pulled back elegantly, her face glowing with accomplishment. As she adjusted the microphone, I saw her scanning the audience, and for a moment her eyes met mine in the back row. She smiled and gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Dean Morrison, distinguished faculty, proud families, and fellow graduates," Emma began, her voice clear and strong. "Today we celebrate not just our individual achievements, but the network of support that made our dreams possible." Patricia was beaming in the front row, clearly expecting to be prominently featured in Emma's remarks. "Medical education is expensive," Emma continued. "The average debt for graduates in our class exceeds $200,000, but I am fortunate to be graduating debt-free, thanks to the most generous and selfless person I have ever known." I felt my heart start to race. Surely she wasn't going to. For 8 years, someone has been secretly funding my education. Someone who liquidated their entire life savings, sold precious possessions, took on additional work, and sacrificed their own comfort to ensure I could pursue my dream of becoming a doctor. Patricia's smile began to falter. She turned to Robert with a confused expression, clearly trying to understand what Emma was talking about. This person asked for no recognition, wanted no credit, and went to extraordinary lengths to remain anonymous. But through careful investigation and the help of the university's development office, I discovered the identity of my guardian angel. My hands were trembling now. Several people in the back row were looking at me with curious expressions, as if sensing something significant was about to happen. The total amount of this gift, and it was a gift, not a loan, was $800,000 over 8 years. A gasp went through the auditorium. Patricia's face went pale, and she grabbed Robert's arm with such force that he winced visibly. This extraordinary act of love came from someone who has been treated as less important, less valuable, less worthy of respect by some members of our family. Someone who was told just today that poor people belong in the back. Oh, Patricia was now staring directly at Emma with an expression of dawning horror. "I want to publicly thank my grandmother, Margaret Eleanor Whitmore, for the most incredible sacrifice any person could make. Grandma Margaret, could you please stand up?" The auditorium erupted in applause as I slowly rose from my seat in the back row. Tears were streaming down my face as hundreds of people turned to look at me with expressions of admiration and respect. Grandma Margaret sold her house, her furniture, her jewelry, her late husband's car collection, and liquidated her entire retirement fund to pay for my medical education. She took on multiple jobs, lived in a tiny apartment, and literally gave me everything she had. The applause grew louder. I could see Patricia in the front row, her face now completely white, her mouth hanging open in shock. When I tried to find out who my anonymous donor was, I discovered that she had established a trust fund, worked with university administrators, and created an elaborate system to ensure I would never know where the money came from. She wanted no credit, no recognition, and no thanks. Emma paused, wiping away tears of her own. But I also discovered something else. My grandmother never told anyone in our family what she was doing. She allowed people to believe she had become poor, to treat her as if she were a burden, to dismiss her as unimportant. She endured years of condescension and disrespect while secretly making the greatest sacrifice possible. I could see Robert in the front row, his face buried in his hands. He was finally understanding the magnitude of what I had done and what he had allowed Patricia to do to me. Today, as I graduate from Harvard Medical School with highest honors, I want everyone to know that this achievement belongs to my grandmother. Every research paper I published, every exam I passed, every skill I learned, it was all made possible by a woman who loved me more than she loved her own security. The standing ovation was thunderous. People in the back section were patting my shoulders, shaking my hand, and offering congratulations. Mrs. Chen was crying openly, and Marcus Williams was applauding so hard his hands were red. Grandma Margaret, Emma continued from the podium, you taught me that true wealth isn't measured in money or possessions, but in the love we give to others. You showed me what it means to sacrifice for family, to believe in someone's dreams even when they can't afford them themselves. I was sobbing now, overwhelmed by the public recognition, but more importantly, by the knowledge that Emma understood what I had done and why I had done it. I have one more announcement to make, Emma said, her voice growing stronger. I have been accepted into the pediatric surgery residency program here at Harvard, one of the most competitive programs in the country. But more importantly, I have established a scholarship fund in my grandmother's name, the Margaret Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Medical Education, to help other students whose families can't afford their dreams. The applause was deafening. I could barely stand as emotion overwhelmed me. And I have one final thing to say to those family members who treated my grandmother as less than she deserved. She is the most important person in my life, and she will always have a place of honor at my table, in my home, and in my heart. As Emma concluded her speech and the ceremony continued, I remained standing, accepting congratulations from everyone around me. Graduate after graduate came to shake my hand, their own family members embracing me as if I were their own grandmother. But my eyes were fixed on the front row, where Patricia sat frozen in her seat, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. Robert had turned to look at me, his expression a mixture of shame, regret, and what might have been admiration. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photographs and celebrations, I made my way slowly toward the front of the auditorium. The crowd parted as I walked, people continuing to offer congratulations and thanks. Emma saw me coming and broke away from a group of her classmates to run toward me. She enveloped me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe. Grandma Margaret, she whispered in my ear, I have known for 2 years. I hired a private investigator to find out who my donor was because I couldn't graduate without knowing who to thank. I pulled back to look at her face, shocked by this revelation. You knew. I knew. And I have been planning this moment for months. I wanted everyone to understand what you sacrificed for me, especially the people who should have known better. Behind Emma, Patricia appeared, her face still pale, but her expression now shifting between embarrassment and what might have been anger. Margaret, she said, her voice tight, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? The question was so absurd that I almost laughed. Tell you what, Patricia, that I was secretly funding Emma's education while you told me that poor people belonged in the back? But $800,000? Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. Where did you get? I earned it, I said simply. Harold and I worked hard our entire lives, saved money, made investments. We never had much, but we had enough. And when Emma needed help, I did what grandparents do. I helped. Robert finally approached, his face showing the weight of years of regret. "Mom," he said, using a word he hadn't spoken to me with genuine affection in decades. "I am so sorry. I should have stopped her. I should have protected you." "You should have," I agreed. "But you didn't, and I survived it." Patricia was now staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. "But you lived in that tiny apartment. You wore those old clothes. You worked at the library. Because every dollar I didn't spend on myself could go to Emma's future," I explained patiently. "I chose to live simply so she could achieve her dreams." "But we could have helped," Robert said desperately. "If we had known." "Could you?" I asked. "Really? Because in the past 8 years you've spent more on vacations and cars and home renovations than I spent on Emma's entire education. You had the means to help, but you chose not to. I chose differently." The truth of that statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Emma took my arm protectively. "Grandma Margaret, I've made arrangements. You're not going back to that apartment. I've rented a beautiful house near the hospital where I'll be doing my residency. We're going to live together, and you're going to let me take care of you for a change." "Emma, dear," I started to protest, but she cut me off. "No arguments. I have a signing bonus from the hospital. I have a full salary starting next month, and most importantly, I have a debt to repay. You gave me everything. Now it's my turn." Over Emma's shoulder, I could see other family members approaching. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had witnessed the ceremony and heard Emma's speech. Their faces showed a mixture of shame and newfound respect. Patricia's sister Victoria, who had made the comment about my little pension earlier that morning, approached hesitantly. "Margaret," she said awkwardly, "I owe you an apology. We all do." "Yes," I said simply, "you do." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with various family members offering belated recognition and apologies. But I found myself growing tired of their shock and dismay. Where had their concern been for the past 8 years when they watched Patricia treat me poorly? Emma sensed my fatigue and began steering me away from the crowd. "Come on, Grandma. I want to show you something." She led me to a quiet corner of the reception area where a photographer was waiting. "I've arranged for us to have professional portraits taken. I want pictures of us together on this day, because this is really our graduation, isn't it?" As we posed for photographs, Emma whispered, "I need you to know something else. The scholarship foundation I mentioned? It's real, and it's fully funded. Some of my classmates whose families made significant donations to the university were so moved by your story that they've pledged money to help other students. We've already raised over $2 million. I stared at her in amazement. "Emma, that's wonderful. But how?" "Your sacrifice inspired other people to be generous too, Grandma. That's the power of what you did. It wasn't just about me. It was about showing everyone what love looks like." As we finished the photo session, I saw Patricia watching us from across the room. She looked lost, confused, and perhaps for the first time in her adult life, genuinely humbled. Later that evening, at the family dinner that Patricia had organized at an expensive restaurant, the dynamics had shifted completely. Patricia had attempted to seat me at the head of the table, but I declined, choosing instead to sit next to Emma. During the meal, Patricia made several attempts to redirect the conversation away from my sacrifices and toward what she clearly hoped would be a more comfortable topic. But Emma wasn't having any of it. "I want to talk about what happens next," Emma announced as the main course was being served. "I start my residency in 6 weeks, and Grandma Margaret will be living with me. I also want to make sure everyone understands that she is the guest of honor at every family gathering from now on." Robert nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. Mom, I want you to know that things are going to be different from now on." "Are they?" I asked mildly. "Because Patricia hasn't actually apologized to me yet. She's expressed shock and surprise, but she hasn't acknowledged that her behavior was wrong." All eyes turned to Patricia, who was pushing food around on her plate without eating. Finally, she looked up at me. "Margaret," she said slowly, "I apologize for the way I've treated you. I was wrong, and I'm embarrassed by my behavior. It wasn't the most heartfelt apology I'd ever received, but it was a start." "Thank you," I said. "Apology accepted." The dinner continued with a markedly different tone. People asked me questions about my work at the library, my small apartment, and my experiences over the past 8 years. For the first time in decades, I felt like a full member of the family rather than a barely tolerated appendage. As we were leaving the restaurant, Patricia approached me one last time. "Margaret," she said quietly, "I need to understand something. Why didn't you defend yourself? Why didn't you tell us what you were doing?" I considered her question carefully. "Because, Patricia, what I was doing wasn't about you or Robert or anyone else. It was about Emma and her future. Your opinion of me was irrelevant to that goal. But you let us think," she started. "I let you think what you wanted to think," I interrupted. "I never told you I was poor. I never asked for your pity or your help. You made assumptions based on appearances, and I let you live with those assumptions." Patricia's face reddened. "But that made us look bad." "No," I said firmly. "Your behavior made you look bad. My circumstances were irrelevant to how you should have treated me." That night, as Emma and I sat in my small apartment, for the last time, as she insisted we would be moving the next week, she asked me if I regretted any of it. "The money?" I asked. "Never. Not the money. The secrecy. The way you let people treat you." I thought about her question while I made us tea. "Emma, there's something important you need to understand about dignity. Real dignity doesn't come from how people treat you. It comes from how you treat others and from living according to your values." But didn't it hurt when Patricia was cruel to you? Of course it hurt, but her cruelty said nothing about me and everything about her. I knew what I was doing and why I was doing it. Her approval or disapproval was irrelevant to the value of my actions. Emma curled up next to me on my small sofa. "You're the strongest person I know, Grandma Margaret." "No, dear, I'm just someone who understood what was important and was willing to pay the price for it." Over the next several weeks, as Emma and I moved into our new living arrangement, the story of my 8-year sacrifice spread beyond our immediate family. The university featured our story in their alumni magazine, and several local newspapers picked up the article. I received hundreds of letters from people who had been moved by the story. Some were from other grandparents who had made similar sacrifices for their grandchildren's education. Others were from students who were struggling to pay for college and were inspired to keep working toward their goals. One letter particularly touched me. It was from a woman named Sarah Martinez, whose grandmother had paid for her nursing education by working 3 jobs and eating 1 meal a day for 4 years. Sarah had never known about her grandmother's sacrifice until after the woman passed away, and she regretted never having the chance to properly thank her. "Your granddaughter was lucky to discover your gift while she could still tell you how grateful she is," Sarah wrote. "Please know that there are probably hundreds of grandparents like you who never received the recognition they deserved." The Margaret Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Medical Education was officially launched 6 months after Emma's graduation. The initial funding of over $3 million had grown through additional donations from people who had heard our story. Emma served as the foundation's president, and I was asked to serve on the board of directors. Our first scholarship recipient was Marcus Williams's daughter, the young woman I had met at the graduation ceremony. Her father's factory job wasn't enough to cover her final year of medical school, and she was considering dropping out. The foundation covered her remaining tuition and expenses, allowing her to graduate with her class. Patricia's behavior toward me did change, though it took time. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete, but she began making genuine efforts to include me in family decisions and to treat me with respect. I suspected that part of her motivation was embarrassment over being exposed as someone who had mistreated an elderly family member, but I decided to accept the change regardless of its source. Robert's relationship with me underwent a more profound transformation. The revelation of my sacrifice seemed to awaken something in him, perhaps guilt, perhaps admiration, or perhaps a combination of both. He began visiting regularly, calling to check on me, and slowly rebuilding the close relationship we had lost over the years. One afternoon, about a year after Emma's graduation, Robert came to visit while Emma was at the hospital. We sat in the garden behind the house Emma and I shared, drinking lemonade and watching the flowers bloom. "Mom," he said suddenly, "I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." I waited, sensing that this was important. "I was a coward. For years, I watched Patricia treat you badly, and I did nothing to stop it. I told myself it was easier to keep the peace, but the truth is, I was afraid of conflict. I was afraid of her. And now? I asked. Now I understand that my fear cost me 8 years of having a real relationship with you. I let you sacrifice everything for Emma while I stood by and watched you being treated like a second-class citizen in your own family. I reached over and took his hand. Robert, we can't change the past. We can only decide what to do with the future. I want to be better, he said. I want to be the son you deserve to have. You already are, I told him. The fact that you recognize your mistakes and want to change shows me that Harold and I did something right when we raised you. Emma's residency was challenging, but rewarding. She worked long hours and studied constantly, but she loved every moment of it. Her natural talent for surgery was quickly recognized by her supervisors, and she was given increasingly complex cases to handle. Living with Emma brought me joy I hadn't experienced in years. After decades of living alone, it was wonderful to have someone to cook for, to worry about, and to share daily life with. Emma insisted on taking care of all the household expenses, and for the first time since Harold's death, I felt financially secure. I was able to resume some of the activities I had given up during the years of sacrifice. I joined a book club at the local library, started taking art classes at the community center, and even began traveling again. Emma often encouraged me to spend money on myself, reminding me that I had given enough and deserved to enjoy life. 2 years after Emma's graduation, we received an unexpected visitor. Patricia arrived one afternoon while Emma was at work, carrying a large wrapped package. "Margaret," she said when I opened the door, "I have something for you." I invited her in, curious about this unusual visit. Patricia seemed nervous, which was uncharacteristic for her. "I've been doing some thinking over the past 2 years," she began, "about the things I said and did, about the way I treated you." She handed me the package. "I want you to have this." I unwrapped it carefully and gasped when I saw what was inside. It was a beautiful photo album, leather-bound and filled with pictures spanning Emma's entire educational journey from kindergarten through medical school graduation. "I know you had to sell a lot of your personal possessions," Patricia said quietly, "including photo albums and mementos. I thought you might like to have this record of Emma's achievements that were possible because of you." I flipped through the pages, seeing Emma at various ages and stages of her education. There were school photos, science fair projects, graduation ceremonies, and candid shots of family gatherings. "Patricia," I said, genuinely moved, "this is beautiful. Thank you." "There's something else," she continued. "I've been talking to Victoria and some of our other family members about the way we all treated you. We want to do something to show our respect and appreciation." She pulled out a small velvet box and handed it to me. Inside was a beautiful necklace with a pendant that read, "World's Greatest Grandmother." "It's not enough," Patricia said, her eyes filling with tears. "Nothing could be enough to make up for our behavior. But we wanted you to have something that reflects how we really feel about what you did." For the first time since I had known her, Patricia seemed genuinely humble and remorseful. "I need to tell you something else," she continued. "Robert and I are getting divorced." I was surprised by this revelation, though perhaps I shouldn't have been. "I'm sorry to hear that, Patricia. Is there anything I can do?" She shook her head. "The problems in our marriage go back years, long before Emma's graduation. But seeing how I treated you, and seeing Robert's reaction to discovering what you had done, made us both realize some things about ourselves that we didn't like. Change is possible at any age," I said gently. "You've shown that by being here today." Patricia stayed for another hour, and we had the most honest conversation we had ever shared. She told me about her own insecurities, her fears about not being good enough for Robert's family, and how she had used condescension toward me as a way to make herself feel superior. "I know it doesn't excuse my behavior," she said, "but I want you to understand that it was never really about you. It was about my own inadequacies." After she left, I called Emma at the hospital to tell her about the visit. Emma was surprised, but pleased that Patricia had made such a gesture. "Do you forgive her?" Emma asked. "I forgave her a long time ago," I said. "Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from carrying anger and resentment." "You never seemed angry," Emma observed. "I was hurt sometimes, but anger would have taken energy I needed for more important things, like funding your education." As Emma's residency continued, she began to talk about her future plans. She was being courted by several prestigious hospitals and had opportunities to join established surgical practices or to start her own clinic. "Whatever you decide," I told her, "I'm proud of you. "I've made my decision," she said one evening over dinner. "I want to start a practice that focuses on providing surgical care to underserved communities, children whose families can't afford the best medical care." I wasn't surprised by her choice. The girl who had benefited from anonymous generosity wanted to give back to others in similar circumstances. "There's something else," Emma continued. "I want you to be involved in the practice, not as a patient or as a relative, as a partner. I want to establish a foundation connected to the medical practice, and I want you to run it." "Emma, dear, I'm 75 years old. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know everything about sacrifice, about making hard decisions for the good of others, and about managing resources carefully. You're the most qualified person I know." The Eleanor Emma Free Clinic opened 18 months later in a neighborhood where many families struggled to access quality medical care. Emma served as the chief surgeon, and I managed the foundation that funded the clinic's operations and provided grants to help families with medical expenses they couldn't afford. The clinic was an immediate success. Emma's skill as a surgeon, combined with her compassionate approach to patient care, quickly earned her a reputation as one of the city's most gifted pediatric surgeons. More importantly, families who had never been able to afford specialized surgical care now had access to the same quality treatment available at the most expensive private hospitals. I threw myself into the foundation work with enthusiasm I hadn't felt in years. We organized fundraising events, applied for grants, and built partnerships with other charitable organizations. The Margaret Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Medical Education became one of our major supporters, and we were able to help dozens of young people pursue medical careers. One day, about 3 years after Emma's graduation, I received a phone call that would change everything once again. "Mrs. Whitmore," the caller said, "this is James Patterson from Patterson, Wells & Associates. We're a law firm specializing in estate planning and inheritance matters. I'm calling regarding your late husband, Harold Whitmore." My heart skipped a beat. Harold had been gone for over 15 years. What could a lawyer possibly want regarding his estate now? "I'm sorry, Mr. Patterson, but my husband's estate was settled years ago. There must be some mistake." "Mrs. Whitmore, I understand your confusion, but there's been a recent development. Are you familiar with your husband's military service record?" Of course. Harold served in Vietnam. He was awarded several medals for his service, including a Purple Heart. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask you to sit down. What I'm about to tell you may come as quite a shock." I settled into my favorite chair, feeling a familiar anxiety creeping up my spine. 3 months ago, the Department of Veterans Affairs discovered a significant error in their record system. Your husband's file was incorrectly processed when he passed away, and you were not given the full benefits you were entitled to receive. "What kind of benefits?" I asked cautiously. "Mrs. Whitmore, your husband was exposed to Agent Orange during his service. His death 15 years ago was directly related to complications from that exposure. Under current VA regulations, you should have received compensation of approximately $50,000 per year from the time of his death until now." I felt the room spinning around me. $50,000 per year for 15 years? "Yes, ma'am. The total amount you should have received is $750,000 plus interest and penalty payments for the government's error. The total settlement amount is just over $1 million. I couldn't speak. After liquidating everything I owned to pay for Emma's education, after years of living in poverty and working multiple jobs, after selling Harold's precious belongings and my family heirlooms, there had been money I should have received all along. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'm here. The government is prepared to issue immediate payment of the full amount, plus an additional settlement for the hardship their error caused. Would you like me to proceed with the paperwork?" After I hung up the phone, I sat in silence for nearly an hour. The irony was overwhelming. If I had received this money when Harold died, Emma's education would have been easy to fund. I wouldn't have had to sacrifice everything. I wouldn't have endured years of Patricia's condescension. I wouldn't have lived in poverty or worked myself to exhaustion. But then again, without those struggles, would Emma have understood the true value of her education? Would she have chosen to dedicate her career to helping underserved communities? Would she have established the Scholarship Foundation? Would our family dynamics have ever changed? When Emma came home that evening, she found me still sitting in the same chair, staring out the window. "Grandma Margaret, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told her about the phone call, about the money that should have been mine all along, about the bitter irony of timing. Emma listened in stunned silence, then sat down beside me and took my hand. "Oh, Grandma," she said softly, "you could have kept your house, your furniture, everything." "Yes," I agreed. "I could have. Are you angry about the government's mistake?" I considered her question carefully. "I'm sad about the lost years, about the unnecessary hardship. But angry? No. Because if I had received that money 15 years ago, everything would have been different." "Different how?" "You might not have understood the value of sacrifice. I might not have learned how strong I really am. Our family might never have confronted its problems. Patricia and I might still be playing the same dysfunctional games." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "So, what will you do with the money now?" "I've been thinking about that all afternoon," I said. "And I think I know exactly what Harold would want me to do with it." The next morning I called James Patterson and instructed him to proceed with the settlement. Within 2 weeks, I had received the largest check I had ever seen in my life. I didn't tell anyone in the family about the money immediately. Instead, I spent several days developing a plan that I thought would honor both Harold's memory and the lessons we had all learned over the past few years. My first stop was the university's development office, where I met with the same administrators who had helped me establish Emma's anonymous scholarship years earlier. "I want to expand the Margaret Eleanor Whitmore Foundation," I told them. "I want to create an endowment that will provide full scholarships for medical students whose families can't afford the tuition, with a preference for students from military families." The development officer, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, was thrilled by the proposal. "Mrs. Whitmore, an endowment of this size could help dozens of students every year for decades to come." I allocated $500,000 to the scholarship endowment, ensuring that other young people would never have to choose between their dreams and their family's financial security. My second stop was to meet with Emma and the board of our medical clinic. I wanted to expand our services and establish satellite clinics in other underserved neighborhoods. "With this funding," Emma said excitedly as we reviewed the expansion plans, "we could triple the number of patients we serve and hire additional specialists." I allocated $200,000 to the clinic expansion, with the remainder going into an operating fund to ensure the clinic's long-term sustainability. That left me with about $300,000, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. I called a family meeting for the following Sunday, asking everyone to come to Emma's and my house for dinner. Robert came, along with his new girlfriend Susan, a teacher who seemed to genuinely appreciate family values. Patricia came alone, as she and Robert had finalized their divorce the previous month. Emma invited several of her closest friends from medical school, young doctors who had become like family to us. Victoria had flown in from the East Coast with her husband and teenage daughter, and several other relatives had driven in from surrounding cities. Even Marcus Williams and his daughter, our scholarship recipient, had accepted the invitation. As we gathered around the large dining table Emma had purchased when we moved into the house, I looked around at the faces of people who had become so important to me. Some had been part of my life for decades. Others were newer additions who had enriched our family circle. "I asked you all here tonight because I have an announcement to make," I began, standing up and raising my glass of wine. 3 weeks ago, I received some unexpected news that has given me the opportunity to share something wonderful with all of you. I told them about the government settlement, about Harold's military service, and the benefits I should have received years ago. I watched their faces as they processed the information. Shock, joy, and perhaps a little guilt from those who remembered how I had struggled financially. "The money couldn't have come at a better time 15 years ago," I continued, "but it has come at the perfect time now, because now I understand what's truly valuable, and I know exactly how to use it." I explained about the scholarship endowment and the clinic expansion, and the room erupted in applause and congratulations. "But there's one more thing," I said, raising my hand for silence. "I want to use the remaining money to establish college funds for all the young people in this room." I turned to Victoria's daughter. "Jessica, you're 16 now and thinking about college. I want to make sure you can pursue any dream you choose." I handed her an envelope. "This check will cover your entire undergraduate education at any university you can get into." Jessica burst into tears, and Victoria looked stunned. I turned to Marcus Williams's daughter. "Keisha, you'll be finishing medical school soon, but I know you're worried about residency costs and eventually starting your own practice. This should help with that." Another envelope, another tearful reaction. I continued around the room, giving envelopes to Emma's friends who were starting their medical careers, to the teenage children of various relatives, and even to the young library assistant who had been helping me with foundation paperwork. "Grandma Margaret," Robert said, his voice choked with emotion, "this is incredible. But what about you? Don't you want to keep some of this money for yourself?" I smiled at him. "Robert, I have everything I need. I have a beautiful home with Emma, meaningful work with the foundation and clinic, and the love of people who matter to me. What more could I want?" Patricia, who had been unusually quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke up. "Margaret, I don't know what to say. After the way I treated you." "Patricia," I interrupted gently, "the past is the past. What matters is who we are now and how we treat each other going forward." "But you could have been comfortable all these years," she insisted. "You could have avoided all that struggle." "Could I?" I asked. "Really? Because I think the struggle taught me things I needed to learn. It taught Emma the value of sacrifice. It taught our family the difference between what's important and what's merely convenient." Emma stood up beside me, putting her arm around my shoulders. "I want to say something to everyone here," she announced. "My grandmother gave me the greatest gift anyone could receive, not just the money for my education, but the example of what love looks like in action." She turned to face me. "But you gave me something else, too. You gave me the knowledge that when someone you love needs help, you don't count the cost. You don't ask what's in it for you. You just do whatever needs to be done." "That's exactly right," I said. "And now I want all of you to remember that lesson. We're family, not just blood relatives, but chosen family. That means we look out for each other, we support each other's dreams, and we don't let anyone face their struggles alone." The evening continued with stories, laughter, and tears. People shared memories of Harold, talked about their dreams and plans for the future, and made commitments to stay connected and support each other. As the party was winding down, Patricia approached me privately. "Margaret, I need to tell you something. Watching you tonight, seeing how generous you are even after everything our family put you through, I understand something I never got before." "What's that?" I asked. "True class isn't about money or status or appearances. It's about how you treat people when no one is watching and how you respond when life tests you." "That's a lesson that took me a long time to learn," I admitted. "I want to be better," Patricia said. "Not just to you, but to everyone. I want to be the kind of person who builds others up instead of tearing them down." "You already are becoming that person," I told her. "Change is possible at any age." 6 months later, the expanded clinic network was operational, and we were serving over 300 families. Emma had been recognized as Young Surgeon of the Year by the State Medical Association, and the Scholarship Foundation had awarded its first round of grants to 15 students. I was busier than I had been in years, traveling between clinic locations, meeting with potential donors, and overseeing the foundation's operations. The work was exhausting, but fulfilling in ways I had never experienced. One afternoon, as I was reviewing grant applications in my office at the main clinic, Emma knocked on my door. "Grandma Margaret, I have something I want to discuss with you." She came in and sat across from my desk, looking nervous. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "Everything's wonderful," she said quickly. "That's actually what I want to talk about. I've been thinking about the future, about what we're building here." "What about it?" "I want to make sure it continues long after we're both gone. I want to create a legacy that will help people for generations." Emma pulled out a thick folder and placed it on my desk. "I've been working with some lawyers and business consultants. I want to establish a permanent institution, the Whitmore Institute for Community Medicine." I opened the folder and began reading through the proposals. The institute would combine medical services, education, and research with a focus on serving underserved populations. It would include the existing clinics, an expanded scholarship program, and a training center for young doctors who wanted to specialize in community medicine. "Emma, this is incredible," I said, flipping through the detailed plans. "But the funding alone, that's the beautiful part," Emma interrupted excitedly. "I've been talking to other doctors, hospital systems, and philanthropists. Everyone wants to be part of this. We already have commitments for over $10 million in funding." I stared at the numbers on the page, hardly believing what I was seeing. "There's one more thing," Emma said softly. "I want you to be the Institute's first president. Not honorary president, actual president. I want you to lead this organization. Emma, I'm 76 years old. I don't have experience running something this large. Grandma Margaret, you single-handedly funded a Harvard medical education while keeping it secret for 8 years. You transformed our family dynamics through quiet dignity and persistent love. You built a scholarship foundation from nothing and expanded a small clinic into a network serving hundreds of families. What more experience do you need? I looked at my granddaughter, this brilliant, compassionate woman whose dreams I had helped nurture, and realized she was right. Age was just a number. Experience came in many forms, and I had more to contribute than I had ever imagined. All right, I said, smiling. Let's build an institute. The Whitmore Institute for Community Medicine was officially launched 2 years later with a ceremony that was covered by national media. The story of the grandmother who secretly funded her granddaughter's medical education and the granddaughter who used that education to serve others had captured public attention. The keynote speaker at the launch ceremony was the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who praised the institute as a model for community-based healthcare. But the moment that meant the most to me came when Marcus Williams, whose daughter was now one of our resident physicians, took the microphone. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "you changed my family's life by believing in my daughter's dreams. But you did something more important than that. You showed us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they love each other enough." As I looked out at the audience, filled with patients we had served, students we had helped, and family members who had learned to support each other, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. It had started with a simple decision to help my granddaughter pursue her dreams. It had involved sacrifice, secrecy, and years of enduring disrespect from people who should have known better. But it had led to something none of us could have imagined, a legacy of service that would touch thousands of lives. Harold would have been proud, I thought. We had taken the resources he worked so hard to accumulate and used them to build something that would make a difference long after we were gone. At the age of 78, I found myself the president of a multi-million-dollar institution, overseeing programs that provided medical care to underserved communities, education to aspiring doctors, and hope to families who had thought quality healthcare was beyond their reach. Emma, now 32 and one of the most respected pediatric surgeons in the region, served as the Institute's chief medical officer. She had never married, claiming that her work was her greatest love, though I suspected that might change when she met the right person. Robert had remarried. His wife Susan was a wonderful addition to our family who had embraced the Institute's mission and volunteered her time teaching literacy classes to patients' families. He had become a devoted son again, visiting regularly and helping with the Institute's administrative needs. Patricia had moved across the country but stayed in touch regularly. She had started her own small nonprofit organization focused on helping elderly people navigate healthcare systems, and she often called to ask for advice about running a charitable organization. The transformation in her character had been remarkable, and she had become someone I genuinely respected. The Scholarship Foundation had grown beyond anything I had imagined. We were now providing full scholarships to over 50 students per year, with recipients going on to serve in community clinics, rural hospitals, and other underserved areas. Several former recipients had returned to work at our institute, creating a beautiful cycle of service. One evening, as Emma and I sat in the garden behind our house, she asked me a question that made me reflect on everything we had accomplished. "Grandma Margaret, do you ever regret the choice you made 8 years ago? Do you ever wish you had kept the money and lived comfortably instead of sacrificing everything for my education?" I looked at her, this remarkable woman who had dedicated her life to serving others, who had used her skills and education to make the world better, and I knew my answer immediately. "Emma, if I had kept the money, you might have become a successful doctor anyway. You're brilliant and determined enough to have found another path, but you might not have understood the true meaning of service. You might not have felt compelled to use your talents for those who need them most." "And you?" she asked. "What about your own life?" "My life has been richer than I ever expected," I said honestly. "I've learned that the most valuable things we can possess aren't things at all. They're relationships, purpose, and the knowledge that we've made a difference. Even when Patricia was cruel to you, even when you had to sell everything you treasured?" "Especially then," I said, "because those experiences taught me that my worth didn't depend on other people's recognition or on material possessions. My worth came from my ability to love generously and act according to my values. Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, I hope I can be as wise as you when I'm older. You already are wise, Emma. You're using your gifts to help others, you're building something that will last long after we're gone, and you're treating people with kindness and respect regardless of their circumstances. What more wisdom do you need? As I write this, I am 82 years old. The Whitmore Institute has become a nationally recognized model for community-based healthcare, serving over 2,000 patients annually and training hundreds of young doctors. Our scholarship program has helped over 300 students pursue medical careers, and many of them are now leaders in their own communities. Emma is now 36 and has been approached by several universities about leading their medical schools. She hasn't decided yet whether to take on such a role, but I know that whatever path she chooses, she will continue to make a difference in people's lives. The most surprising development has been in my relationship with Patricia. Last month, she called to tell me that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer. Without hesitation, I flew across the country to be with her during her surgery and recovery. Margaret, she said as I sat beside her hospital bed, I can't believe you came, after everything I put you through. Patricia, I said, taking her hand, your family. Family shows up when it matters. She started crying then, not just from the medication or the fear, but from what seemed like years of accumulated regret and gratitude. I wasted so many years being petty and cruel, she whispered. I could have had a real relationship with you all this time. The past is past, I told her. What matters is that we have time now to be the family we should have been all along. Patricia is doing well now, her cancer in remission, and she has moved back to be closer to our family. She helps with the Institute's outreach programs and has become genuinely close to Emma, who forgave her long ago and seems to enjoy having an aunt who can share stories about her father's childhood. As I reflect on the 8 years since that graduation ceremony, I realize that my decision to secretly fund Emma's education was about more than just helping one young woman achieve her dreams. It was about demonstrating that love requires sacrifice, that dignity comes from within, and that the most important gifts we can give are often invisible to others. The money I spent on Emma's education was just money. It could be earned, saved, and spent. But the example I set, the values I demonstrated, and the love I showed have created ripples that will continue long after I'm gone. Young people who received our scholarships are now serving patients in communities across the country. Doctors trained at our institute are opening their own clinics in underserved areas. Families who received care at our clinics are healthier, stronger, and better able to pursue their own dreams. Most importantly, our family learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in the depth of our relationships and the impact we have on others. Emma often tells people that I gave her everything, but the truth is more complex than that. Yes, I gave her the money for her education, but she gave me something far more valuable. She gave me the opportunity to discover what I was truly capable of, and she used my gift in ways that honored both the sacrifice and the love behind it. That day, when Patricia told me that poor people belong in the back, she was trying to diminish me based on what she perceived as my circumstances. What she didn't understand was that my circumstances were irrelevant to my value as a person and as a family member. I wasn't poor. I was investing. I wasn't diminished. I was choosing to live simply so someone I loved could dream boldly. I wasn't less than. I was exactly who I needed to be in that moment. The greatest irony is that by treating me as someone unworthy of respect, Patricia missed the opportunity to learn from someone who was demonstrating extraordinary love and sacrifice. By focusing on appearances, she missed the substance of what was really happening. But life has a way of teaching us the lessons we need to learn, even when we're resistant to them. Patricia learned about genuine dignity and real strength. Robert learned about standing up for what's right. Emma learned about service and sacrifice. And I learned about my own resilience and capacity for love. If I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change anything. Every moment of struggle, every sacrifice, every difficult decision led us to where we are now, a family that truly understands what matters and an organization that will continue helping others long after we're gone. Sometimes people ask me if I'm proud of what we've accomplished with the Institute and the scholarship programs. But pride isn't the right word. What I feel is satisfaction. the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've lived according to your values and used your resources to make the world a little better. Emma recently told me that she wants to write a book about our experience, to share the story with other families who might be struggling with similar challenges. I encouraged her to do it, because I think there are valuable lessons in our journey that could help others. The most important lesson is this: love is not a feeling, it's a decision. It's the decision to act in someone else's best interest, even when it costs you something. It's the decision to maintain your dignity, even when others don't recognize your worth. It's the decision to invest in relationships and values rather than in appearances and status. Harold used to say that we're not remembered for what we accumulated, but for what we gave away. I didn't understand the depth of that truth until I gave away everything I had accumulated to help Emma achieve her dreams. Now, as I sit in my office at the Whitmore Institute, surrounded by thank you letters from scholarship recipients, photos of families we've helped, and reports about the lives we've touched, I understand that Harold was absolutely right. The money I spent on Emma's education is gone, but the impact of that investment continues to grow every day. The possessions I sold are long forgotten, but the love I demonstrated has created a legacy that will outlast us all. That's the real secret I learned during those 8 years of sacrifice. The things we think are important, money, status, recognition, material possessions, are actually temporary and ultimately meaningless. The things that last, love, service, dignity, values, are the things that make life worth living. Emma is proof of that truth. She could have used her medical degree to make a fortune in private practice, living comfortably and focusing on her own success. Instead, she chose to dedicate her life to serving others, to building something bigger than herself, to using her gifts in ways that honor the sacrifices that made her education possible. As I conclude this account of the most important 8 years of my life, I want to leave you with this thought. We all have the opportunity to make invisible investments in the people we love. These investments might not be recognized or appreciated in the moment, but they have the power to change lives and create legacies that extend far beyond our own existence. The choice to love generously, sacrifice willingly, and maintain dignity in the face of disrespect is available to everyone. It doesn't require wealth or status or special circumstances. It only requires the decision to put someone else's welfare above your own comfort and the persistence to maintain that commitment even when it's difficult. That's what I did for Emma, and that's what she's now doing for hundreds of patients and dozens of young doctors. The cycle continues, the impact grows, and the love multiplies in ways we never could have imagined. Sometimes the greatest gifts are given in secret, recognized only years later when their true impact becomes clear. Sometimes the most important work is done by people who receive no credit, no recognition, and no appreciation. Sometimes the strongest people are those who appear weakest to others, who don't understand what real strength looks like. I was that secret giver, that unrecognized worker, that apparently weak person who was actually demonstrating extraordinary strength. And through it all, I learned that the most valuable thing we can give another person is not money or possessions, but the example of what love looks like in action. That is the legacy I leave behind, not just the scholarship funds or the medical institute or the lives we've touched, but the proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they love deeply enough to sacrifice everything for someone else's dreams. Everything began with a granddaughter who needed help and a grandmother who was willing to give everything to provide it. It became something none of us could have imagined, a testament to the power of love, sacrifice, and quiet dignity to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. And it all started because I understood one simple truth. When someone you love needs help, you don't count the cost. You just do whatever needs to be done, and trust that love will find a way to make it all worthwhile.